Reborn in the 1980s, he became the most despised live-in son-in-law in the entire village. Lame, abusive, sponging off his in-laws, and a bully at home, his father-in-law wished he could chop him up, and his wife looked at him like an enemy. But who would have thought that this good-for-nothing would later go hunting in the mountains with a shabby shotgun, making their life prosperous and earning his father-in-law's respect, and warm the heart of his wife, who had grown cold. Chen Ming, I beg you, stop hitting me. I went to Dad's house to borrow grain because we need to pay the public grain tax. A bitter plea jolted me, as if my soul had returned, and I suddenly opened my eyes wide. Before me, a woman knelt on the ground, wearing only a sleeveless shirt in the freezing cold, shivering all over. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was hallucinating. The woman had fair skin but looked haggard. Her face bore a bright red handprint. She cowered on the ground, her eyes full of fear. I gasped, looked at my calloused, cracked hands, and my mind was a jumble of memories. Wasn't I dying in a hospital bed? I fell while rock climbing, suffered multiple fractures, and in the end, it was my daughter who hated me most who signed the papers and pulled the plug. What's happening now? The woman before me was my wife, Han Xiaomei. But hadn't I already caused her death? I instinctively looked around, feeling both unfamiliar and familiar. The house was old and worn, with gray mud walls, peeling plaster revealing straw. The wooden window frames were pasted with yellowed old newspapers, flapping in the wind. A heated brick bed took up most of the room, its mat full of holes showing wheat straw. Frost hung on the walls, and rusty farm tools were piled in the corner. This was my father-in-law's house in northeast China 20 years ago. I was a live-in son-in-law, having saved Han Xiaomei by chance. Otherwise, with my family's situation, I couldn't have afforded a wife and would have been a bachelor for life. I was sure I had been reborn. Could it be that my regrets before death gave me a second chance? Wife, I'm sorry. I snapped back to reality and reached out to help her up. Don't touch me. As soon as I reached out, Han Xiaomei covered her face in fright, trembling even more. Only then did I see the horsewhip in my hand and the fresh welts on her body. I had done this. This scene was all too familiar. In my previous life, when we had no grain to pay the public tax, she went to her parents' house to borrow grain, and I beat her badly when I found out. It was because I was a live-in son-in-law and had fallen out with my father-in-law. My father-in-law looked down on me, and my mother-in-law didn't like me either. I was useless. My work points weren't enough to pay the public grain tax, and the family often went hungry. In my previous life, I was selfish, insecure, sensitive, and timid. I only got a wife by saving her, but she fell out with her family to defend me, suffered hardships, and finally died unjustly. That was the deepest pain in my heart. Now, reborn in the rural northeast of the 1980s, seeing my beloved wife again, I was so moved that tears streamed down my face. I threw away the whip and fell to my knees. Wife, I'm sorry, I'm not human. Get up, the ground is cold. I promise I'll never hit you again. Let's live well, okay? My voice trembled with tears. Heaven gave me a second chance, and in this life, I won't let my wife suffer again. In my previous life, I always felt ashamed to be a live-in son-in-law, mocked wherever I went. But on my deathbed, I realized my father-in-law was just disappointed in me. He had treated me like a son and was willing to marry his daughter to me. I was the one who wasted my life and ruined a good hand. Han Xiaomei heard my words, thought she misheard, and cautiously lowered her hands to look at me. Had enough? If so, Tong Tong is still at Dad's place, probably hungry. I need to go feed him. She asked tentatively, her eyes and movements full of caution. Wife, I promise I'll never hit you again. Really, I won't. Please, trust me one more time, okay? I took off my cotton coat and draped it over her. But Han Xiaomei instinctively threw it to the ground. Her eyes were full of disgust, but she quickly realized and looked at me with pitiful eyes, afraid that her action would bring another beating. I stood frozen, my mind full of the sins I had committed against her. Now the family was so poor we couldn't make ends meet. Relying on my father-in-law's charity would be even more shameful and only invite more contempt. But in this era, though materials were scarce, resources were abundant. Especially in the Northeast, the old mountains had everything. As long as you were willing to work hard and dare to act, you wouldn't go hungry. But I just stayed home doing nothing. Just despite my father-in-law, I made my wife suffer in between. Can I still trust you? Chen Ming, can I still trust you? There's a feeling that even if you cover your mouth, it leaks from your eyes. Han Xiaomei bent over crying, stared at me, and asked in a trembling voice. I was speechless. Yes, could I still be trusted? Trust after trust, only to be met with torment after torment. Her heart had long turned cold. Where was the man she had valued? The man she insisted on marrying no matter what? When would he come back? I took a deep breath and said seriously, "Wife, I know you don't believe anything I say now, but I'll prove it to you. I'll be your beast of burden for the rest of my life to make up for my sins, okay?" As I spoke, I reached out to help her up again. It's so cold, kneeling on the ground. But Han Xiaomei dodged again, got up on her own, and put on the cotton coat from the bed. "I'll go feed the child first," she said expressionlessly, her eyes dull, in a tentative tone. "Okay, go ahead. I'll wait for you to come back." I nodded, still kneeling on the ground. With permission, Han Xiaomei gave me a deep look and walked out wrapped in the coat. In her heart, she thought she really didn't want to come back to this home. If there were any other way, she didn't want to wait anymore and couldn't afford to wait. The man who once loved her was already dead and would never come back. In her heart, there was a grave, holding the living dead. I stood at the door, watching her go. When the door opened, the cold air hit my face like a knife. My body was cold, but my heart burned with fire. This time, reborn, I would make up for all my regrets. "Wife, that beast is dead, I'm back." With that thought, I gritted my teeth, turned, and ran into the house, rummaging through everything. After throwing out a pile of junk, I finally found a shabby old shotgun. I held it, wiped the barrel with my sleeve, fiddled with it a bit, and it was barely usable. My eyes lit up with eager anticipation. With this gun, I could go hunting in the mountains. Even just bagging some pheasants or rabbits would improve our life. At least we wouldn't go hungry. In my previous life, I had spent a lot of time at the shooting range, practicing with guns and bows, and I was also an extreme sports enthusiast. In this era, the Northeast had scarce materials but abundant resources. It was no exaggeration. You could knock down roe deer with a stick, scoop fish with a gourd, and pheasants flew into the rice pot. My fighting spirit was ignited. I wanted to make our life prosperous, earn my father-in-law's respect, and pamper my wife to the skies. It was still snowing outside, and the sound of scolding continued. As soon as Han Xiaomei reached the yard, she saw her father, wearing a white felt hat and holding a whip, standing at the door of the wing room, cursing loudly and kicking the door. That wing room was fourth sister's home. Her mother had given birth to 6 daughters, hoping for a son to carry on the family line, but never succeeded. The older sisters had married out. Fourth sister Han Xiaojuan and Han Xiaomei had both brought in live-in sons-in-law. Hearing her father's curses, Han Xiaomei lowered her head and, taking advantage of his distraction, slipped into the main house. Han Jingui kicked the door and yelled in a loud voice, "You bastard, come out. Stealing the family's grain to gamble. I see you need a beating every 3 days or you'll tear the roof off." I only found out when the creditor came to the door. "Zhang Yuxiang, you can hide from the first day, but not the 15th. Just wait until I catch you. I'll break your dog legs." After Han Jingui tired himself out from cursing, he lashed the whip at the window, cutting strips into the newspaper pasted over it. After a while, the tightly shut door was pushed open. A woman with a big face, wearing a flower-patterned cotton jacket and slightly plump, walked out. "Dad, what are you doing? It's the middle of winter. If you smash the window, me and Yuxiang will freeze to death." "Mom, come out, quick, talk to Dad." Han Xiaojuan yelled at the top of her lungs. Just now, while her father was in a rage, she and her husband hid inside the house, not daring to show their faces. Only when his anger had mostly subsided did she run out to cry for help. "What are you yelling about? Where's that good-for-nothing? Get out here now." Han Jingui shouted at his fourth daughter, but didn't make a move. After all, it was the fourth son-in-law who had caused the trouble, not his daughter. Seeing his daughter still protecting such a scoundrel, he felt frustrated that she wasn't living up to his expectations. "Dad, what are you going to do? He already knows he was wrong. Are you going to beat him to death? Besides, it's not like you only support our family. Aren't you also supporting Chen Ming? That crippled pretty well." My Zhang Yuxiang gambled, but can't he just change? Can Chen Ming change? His leg is so crippled, he'll be a burden for life, just eating for free at home. Useless and spineless. Han Xiaojuan pursed her lips and looked at the house across the way, her face full of disdain. "In that house live me and Han Xiaomei. My leg has a problem, and for the past year I've been at home recuperating. Actually, my leg healed long ago, but I haven't done any work this year. Since I have food and drink anyway, I just pretended to be crippled and stayed home to leech off my father-in-law. I just felt that my father-in-law didn't treat me like a person and was very partial. We're both live-in sons-in-law, but the treatment is completely different. My father-in-law is the village head and lives a prosperous life. Whenever there's something good to eat, he sends it to the fourth daughter and her husband, but never to me, the fifth son-in-law. Over time, I, feeling inferior, harbored resentment, always feeling I had the lowest status in this family. Even the dog in the yard could get a bone to chew. I took out all this anger on my wife, abusing and tormenting her in various ways. The last bit of affection Han Xiaomei had for me turned into resentment during this year of torment. Inside the room, I heard my fourth sister's curses and taunts, and just took a deep breath. Though I was angry inside, on second thought, having done so many wrongs, how could I have the face to argue? Stop talking nonsense. What does it have to do with you? I'll do as I please, but as long as you eat my food, you better act like a decent person. Hearing his fourth daughter say this, Han Jingui glanced at our house and pulled a long face. The Han family has 3 houses, the main house and 2 wing rooms, east and west. Han Jingui had specially built them for his 2 live-in sons-in-law. Though the wing rooms were small, they were newly built and barely livable. But when he thought of these 2 sons-in-law, Han Jingui felt stifled. Neither was reliable. The 4th son-in-law, Zhang Yuxiang, had recently developed a habit of gambling and drinking. But he had his good points on ordinary days. He was quick with his hands and feet, and his mouth was as sweet as honey, able to please his father-in-law. If he could quit gambling, he'd be a good hand at running a household. But I was a hopeless case, like mud that couldn't be plastered on the wall, completely beyond saving. Han Jingui regretted taking me in as a live-in son-in-law. If not for his daughter already having children, he would have had her divorce me long ago. But he was the village head, and a divorce for his daughter would bring a bad reputation, so he had to endure. His daughter was being tormented and abused, screaming miserably at night from beatings. How could Han Jingui not know? But his daughter was set on this good-for-nothing, and no amount of persuasion worked. He had disciplined me many times, even resorting to a knife, but each time I beat her even harder afterward. His daughter was submissive and endured it, and as her father, he was completely helpless. At this moment, hearing his 4th daughter mention me, his anger at Zhang Yuxiang subsided by half. In comparison, I was even worse than Zhang Yuxiang. At least the 4th son-in-law didn't hit his wife. No matter where you go, a man who hits his wife is a good-for-nothing, a bully at home, the most despicable. As Han Jingui was thinking, the door opened. A thin figure, wrapped in a shiny black cotton coat, crept out quietly. Zhang Yuxiang, with messy hair, saw Han Jingui and fell to his knees with a thud. "Dad, I promise I won't go again. If I do, you can chop off my hands. Tomorrow I'll go to the commune to work, earn money properly, be good to Xiujuan, and honor you and Mom. I promise I won't be like Chen Ming, that useless piece of trash who beats his wife." Zhang Yuxiang raised his hand and vowed, his words as sweet as honey. This vow made half of Han Jingui's anger disappear. "You don't hit someone who's smiling, especially his son-in-law." He sighed and scolded with frustration. "You rascal, if I ever find out you're gambling again, I'll break your dog paws. Get up now, don't freeze in this cold. Your mom is cooking tonight, so don't cook. Come in and eat together." After saying this, Han Jingui threw the whip on the snow, put his hands behind his back, and went inside. Zhang Yuxiang got up from the snow, grinned, and said, "See, I told you, Dad cares about us. I'm not like Chen Ming, who only bullies his wife. I know how to cherish you, so of course Dad won't hit me." Han Xiujuan pursed her lips, poked his forehead with her finger, and said, "You just enjoy it, but remember what Dad said. Hurry up and go eat. I'm starving." The 2 walked toward the main house. Inside, I saw this scene, smiled bitterly, and shook my head, my stomach also growling. The family had been out of food for months. Since I fell out with my father-in-law 3 months ago, we hadn't cooked a proper meal. I lay on the Kong like a lord, telling my wife to figure something out. When Han Xiaomei was starving, she would go around the village borrowing potatoes. Her mother, feeling sorry for her daughter, would occasionally secretly bring some food. Days passed like this, and my reputation got worse and worse. My relationship with my father-in-law became more and more strained. Every time we met, it was either a quarrel or a fight. Thinking of this, I felt full of guilt. At first, my father-in-law treated me like his own son, but I was oversensitive and suspicious, and I ruined a good hand. To make him trust me again, I had to do something worthwhile. Lost trust has to be earned back bit by bit. A person still has to rely on himself. I made up my mind and started to pack the tools I needed for going up the mountain. I could set out once I borrowed a net. Inside the house, as soon as Han Jingui entered, he saw his wife stuffing a package into Han Xiaomei's hands. Han Xiaomei turned around and was startled, dropping the things in her hands, and a coarse grain cornmeal bun rolled out. "Mom, I should go back." Han Xiaomei lowered her head and turned to leave. May, wait. There are more buns in the pot. Take 2 back with you. You can't go hungry anymore. Mother Luo Haiying hurried forward, grabbed her daughter's hand, and refused to let go. Seeing her daughter suffer and go hungry, how could a mother not feel heartbroken? Mom, let go. I have to go back. Han Xiaomei raised her head stubbornly, her eyes red, tears welling up, staring at her father Han Jingui, her lips trembling. She regretted it in her heart. If she had listened to her father earlier and divorced Chen Ming, she wouldn't have ended up like this. Now even her father had fallen out with her, and she felt even more ashamed to face him. Especially when her mother was caught secretly giving her buns just now, the last shred of dignity in Han Xiaomei's heart completely collapsed. How had life come to this? Seeing the grievance in Han Xiaomei's eyes, Han Jingui felt terrible. He frowned, slowly squatted down, and picked up the bun. Don't leave today. Eat first, then go. After saying this, Han Jingui sat down on the edge of the Kong, pulled over a small dustpan containing tobacco and an old calendar, tore off a page, rolled it into a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep drag. Hearing her father's words, Han Xiaomei could no longer hold back her tears, which fell in streams. Her mother Luo Haiying hurriedly wiped them with her hand. Old Fifth, your dad said you can eat at home, so stop being stubborn and listen to your mom. Look how hungry you are. Come sit on the Kong. I'll get you some food right away. Eat your fill first. Luo Haiying lowered her head and walked toward the outer room, wiping her tears with her sleeve. As for me, I waited a long time, but my wife didn't come back, and I was so hungry I felt dizzy. Especially since I had just been reborn, my body wasn't used to it yet. I hurriedly got up and went to the outer room to search around, but couldn't find anything to eat. I looked at the firewood pile by the wall. On the corn stalks were clumps of black things. I didn't care about anything else, ran over, pulled one off, and stuffed it into my mouth. This thing is called black smut, a tumor that grows on corn stalks, a kind of fungus powder. It's edible, but it's very rough on the throat. But I was so hungry I saw stars, and I couldn't bring myself to ask my father-in-law for food, so I had to fill my stomach first. I stuffed it into my mouth carelessly, getting it all over my face, looking extremely pathetic and pitiful. As soon as I swallowed, I felt it stuck in my throat, making it hard to breathe. I scrambled to grab the ladle, stuck it into the water vat, broke the ice, scooped a ladle of water, and gulped it down. After swallowing the black smut powder, I stretched my neck, tilted my head back, and took a deep breath. Finally, I recovered, and tears flowed from my eyes. I couldn't wait any longer. I'll bear the consequences of my own mistakes. I wiped my mouth, pushed open the door, and walked toward my father-in-law's house. Without going inside, I stood at the gate and shouted, Xiaomei. Inside the house, Han Xiaomei, sitting on the Kong, was startled by the call and looked at her mother with pleading eyes. Don't be afraid, daughter. Mom will go out and see what that beast wants to do. Luo Haiying saw how frightened her daughter was and got angry. She got up to go out. Han Jingui put down his pipe, stepped ahead of her, and took the horsewhip from the wall. All right, you women stay on the Kong. I'll go out and see what that bastard wants to do. He's asking for it. Han Jingui stormed out. Zhang Yuxiang, who had just finished eating and was picking his teeth, rolled his eyes and quickly followed to watch the excitement. I stood at the gate, just shouted once, and the front door was pushed open. My father-in-law, Han Jingui, walked out with a gloomy face, followed by Zhang Yuxiang, who was bustling along. What are you yelling about? Xiaomei is staying here today. Stop shouting and go back to your own home. Han Jingui came out and said angrily. After hearing this, I nodded, let out a long sigh, wiped my mouth, and said, It's good here. She can eat her fill, better than at my place. Dad, I have a favor to ask. Can you lend me your fish trap? I'll return it when I'm done. I said in a pleading tone. Han Jingui was surprised when he heard this. When did this kid become so polite? He can even say things like borrowing and returning. What do you want that for? Just stay home. With your leg. Don't go wandering around. Han Jingui glanced at my leg. Dad, I can't just starve at home. Going out to try my luck is better than staying home. If you won't lend it, I'll go ask elsewhere. I moved my leg and prepared to turn around. Wait. Han Jingui didn't know what this kid was up to and didn't bother to care. So he turned to Zhang Yuxiang and said, Go to the shed and give him the fish trap. After saying that, he turned and went inside, not giving me a good look the whole time. Zhang Yuxiang readily agreed, muttering as he went to the shed and dragged the fish trap out with effort. What are you standing there for? Come give me a hand. You have no sense. Zhang Yuxiang shouted at me. Okay. I hurriedly moved over. My walking was a bit limping, not very graceful, but it didn't hinder my daily life. This leg isn't incurable. It's just a bit numb and swollen right now. Once I get some herbs and deer blood, I'll cure it early, so people won't gossip and even my wife won't be looked down upon. What are you going to do with this fish trap? Zhang Yuxiang asked, puzzled. Go catch some fish. There's no rice at home, and I can't keep borrowing from Dad. I'm off now, brother-in-law. I grabbed the fish trap. Although my leg had a problem, my hands were fine. If I weren't so hungry, dragging the fish trap would be effortless for me. Forget it. With your leg, you're going fishing? If you fall into an ice hole again, someone will have to fish you out. Zhang Yuxiang muttered, then turned and opened the door to go inside. I gave a bitter smile, dragged the fish trap to my doorstep, slung the shotgun over my shoulder, threw the trap onto the sled, and pulled the rope to walk out. Chen Ming walked out of the yard and onto the village road. A bitingly cold wind blew over, cutting his face like a knife, making him shiver, and goosebumps all over his body. This northeast winter is really cold, so cold that it feels like ice crystals have formed in the marrow of your bones. Fine snowflakes were drifting in the sky, and the ground was already covered with a thick layer of snow. It creaked underfoot, and with every step, you could feel the snow being compacted. The village was quiet, with nothing but the occasional crowing of roosters and barking of dogs. Most chimneys were emitting wisps of blue smoke, as the villagers burned firewood for warmth. Many shabby thatched cottages looked even more dilapidated against the white snow. The thatch on the roofs, exposed to wind and sun all day, had long turned yellow and sparse, with wooden beams visible in some places. There was hardly anyone on the road, and it was desolate. At the edge of the village was a vast open field, now completely covered by heavy snow, with no green in sight. The distant mountains were also tightly wrapped in white, and the continuous peaks, under the gray sky, looked both quiet and distant. This mountain is called Chongling Mountain, said to be connected to the Greater Xing'an Range, very large. Chen Ming took a deep breath, and the cold air rushed into his lungs, making them ache. Such weather is really hard for the villagers. For every household alike. The heating conditions were poor, very bad, and food was not abundant either. Every day had to be endured with gritted teeth. Many families relied on their limited food supplies to barely survive the entire winter. When he passed the small shop at the east end of the village, Chen Ming stopped, leaned on the broken wooden fence, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Uncle Zhang, are you home?" After a moment, a response came from inside. "Stop shouting like that. I'm not dead yet. I'm coming." After a while, a skinny little old man pushed open the wooden door and came out, putting his dogskin hat on his bald head as he walked. When he came out, he saw Chen Ming leaning on his wooden door. "What are you looking at here, Chen Lauer?" "Here to buy on credit again." Old Zhang looked at the handsome Chen Ming and said with annoyance, "This young man used to be so diligent. Although his leg was lame, he was honest and reliable. Who knows what happened later?" After falling out with his father-in-law, he became increasingly harsh to his wife, and even his own parents had a falling out with him. How could he have changed so much? He ruined a good family. Uncle Zhang, I'd like to borrow some sorghum rice, just a small basketful." Chen Ming scratched his head awkwardly and said with a grin. Old Zhang looked at the bruises on Chen Ming's face and knew he must have been beaten up by debtors again. This kid is really hopeless. But today he came not to buy wine on credit, which was indeed a novelty. A small basketful isn't enough, not even enough to fill a sparrow's teeth. "Wait here." After saying that, Old Zhang turned and went back inside. After a while, he came out carrying half a sack of sorghum rice and handed it over the wooden fence. Chen Ming was stunned, a bit surprised. "What are you staring at? Take it quickly. Don't let your wife go hungry with you. It's not that I'm nagging you, but you, a lame guy, managed to marry the village chief's daughter by sheer luck. That's a blessing from your past life. Why don't you cherish it? Listen to me. Stop going against your father-in-law. Living a good life is better than anything else." Old Zhang muttered a few more words, then took off his warm hat and put it on Chen Ming's head. He knew this kid wouldn't listen to him, so he didn't say more and turned back into the house. Watching Old Zhang go inside, Chen Ming licked his dry lips and sighed inwardly, thinking that there were still good people in this world. In his past life, how many bad deeds had he done to make so many people utterly disappointed in him? The ones he owed the most were Han Xiaomei and his daughter. With that thought, Chen Ming shouldered the bag, first went home to put away the grain, then headed out again, straight for Chongling Mountain. Half an hour later, following his memory, Chen Ming arrived at a small pond at the foot of the mountain. The pond's surface was frozen solid, the ice shining brightly. Chen Ming rubbed his hands together, then swung the iron pickaxe in his hands and began to break the ice. Despite his youth and his lame leg, his body was strong and sturdy, full of vigor. After smashing for a while, he finally made a hole. Chen Ming happily placed the flower basket into the hole. Watching the ice shards and water submerge the net, he took out a hemp rope and tied the net, securing the other end to a nearby bush. After finishing, Chen Ming straightened up and took a deep breath. He looked toward the forest in the distance. The reason he was so confident about coming out today was that when he woke up, he discovered a radar map in his head. And this radar seemed to start operating automatically as soon as he entered the mountains. The direction it pointed seemed to hide many secrets. To verify his thoughts, he planned to give it a good try. Following the direction indicated by the radar map in his mind, he quickly found a pheasant lying in a snow nest in the mountain hollow. As soon as he approached, the pheasant, being very alert, instantly leaped high. Chen Ming charged forward with his stiff legs. As the distance closed, he grabbed the shotgun from his shoulder, drawing on years of shooting experience from the shooting range in his past life. The moment the pheasant flapped its wings and took to the air, quick-eyed and quick-handed Chen Ming aimed the already loaded shotgun at the pheasant and pulled the trigger. Bang! The gunshot echoed through the forest, shaking snow off the pine trees. He almost without hesitation shouldered the gun, and pheasant feathers floated in the air. Then, gawk! The pheasant made a sound and fell behind a tree trunk lying in the snow. Chen Ming's face lit up with joy, and he hurriedly rushed over. He grabbed the pheasant by its claws, lifted it upside down, and shook it in front of his eyes. This pheasant is really plump. A bountiful harvest. This one pheasant is enough for 2 meals. Stewed meat and soup to nourish his wife, Han Xiaomei. After slamming the pheasant on the ground a couple of times until it stopped flapping, Chen Ming stuffed it directly into his chest to avoid being seen when returning to the village. After all, there was a rule in hunting. Once you've caught something, even if you meet a stranger on the road, you have to share some. But he wasn't really a hunter, and he hadn't caught big game, just a pheasant, which wasn't even enough for his family. How could he bear to share it with others? Carrying the pheasant, Chen Ming returned to the ice, pulled the net with one hand. Splash! As he pulled it up, a few crucian carp and a pile of river shrimp bounced inside. Crucian carp, or jiguazi, refers to crucian carp, a common freshwater fish. The reason for this nickname is that in the past in the northeast region, crucian carp were smaller than other fish species, and their shape somewhat resembled large melon seeds, so locals habitually called them jiguazi. Although they were small, Chen Ming caught at least 4 or 5 in that one net. He quickly took out the mesh bag he had brought from home and put the shrimp in. The remaining fish were also wrapped in a small net he had prepared in advance, then hung on the gun barrel, swaying. Seeing that it was getting late, and his stomach was growling with hunger, now that he had some gains, Chen Ming wanted to get home quickly to make something to eat, lest he faint from hunger outside. That would be disastrous. As he prepared to return, he looked back at the vast barren mountain behind him with firm eyes. Before the economic reforms, this barren mountain was his hunting ground and the foundation for improving his life. Chen Ming's village was called Chili Village, named because it was 7 li away from Ping'an town. He entered the village with today's rich harvest and indeed met many villagers on the way. About to head home, Chen Ming touched the pheasant hidden in his thigh and felt full of anticipation. Old Six, where have you been? Where did you get those fish? A village woman with a headscarf walked over with a playful smile. Chen Ming looked up and was startled. This woman was none other than Sister Caixia. Sister Caixia was from the same village as her parents and later married into Chili Village. She was only a year or 2 older than Chen Ming. As a child, she used to run after Chen Ming, and even as adults, they were still close. Although Chen Ming was lame, he was handsome. In the surrounding villages, no one was more spirited and neat than him, especially Chen Ming, who had just come back from the mountain. Exuding a masculine aura, it made Sister Caixia's heart itch like a cat scratching, and she couldn't help but want to tease him. 6, your fish look lively, just caught, right? Give your sister a couple. Caixia's eyes rolled, and seeing Chen Ming's right thigh bulging, she curiously ran over and said, what are you hiding there? It's all puffed up. Let your sister see. Sister Caixia, I'll give you fish another day. Hey, sister, don't. Chen Ming was startled, instinctively stepped back 2 steps, barely avoiding being grabbed by this woman. This woman was reckless and had no sense of propriety. Look how scared you are. Your sister isn't going to eat you. Sister Caixia, stop joking. There's nothing. I have to go cook. Chen Ming was a bit embarrassed, greeted her, and then ran off around her. He didn't dare stop along the way, running straight to his own door. Watching Chen Ming flee in panic, dragging the sled toward home, Lu Xiao smacked her lips, almost drooling, thinking that if this lame guy ever got kicked out by his father-in-law, she might be able to pick him up and bring him to her home. Although his leg had a problem, it wasn't a big deal. After all, she was a widow, and others despised her as unlucky. Only the village's old bachelors were always thinking about her, coming to knock on her window at night, but she always chased them away with curses. At this moment, Chen Ming had no idea that he had been earmarked by a widow who wished he would be kicked out by his father-in-law, become homeless, and then she would take him in. When Chen Ming got home, he saw the lights on in his father-in-law's house. After all, he was the village chief. In this era, only the village chief and the accountant's homes had electricity, but they didn't often turn on the lights, as it cost money. He also glanced at Han Xiuzhuan's house. The door was still locked, the house dark. Probably she was also at the father-in-law's place. Chen Ming didn't pay more attention. He opened his own door, went inside, first threw the 2 mesh bags aside, then tossed the pheasant onto the firewood pile. After entering the house, he first lit the kerosene lamp. With the light, the room was no longer pitch dark, and then he ran to the outer room. He took out the pine knots he had stored earlier, lit them, and started the fire. These pine knots are pine resin and can burn for a long time, making them perfect for starting a fire. It can be said that every household has them. After all, a flame lit by a single match doesn't last long, but these pine knots can burn for quite a while. After igniting the corn stalks, he broke the wood branches and piled them on top of the corn stalks. Soon, smoke began to rise. Then Chen Ming started to scoop out the water from the pot, scrubbed it, and since there was no grain left at home, he planned to catch a fish and make some soup tonight to at least fill his stomach. After boiling a pot of hot water, Chen Ming threw the scaled crucian carps into the pot, sprinkled some salt, threw in 2 dried chili peppers, and then covered the pot. He turned and went into the room, feeling the calm, which was still warm. He had been frozen stiff in the mountain hollow earlier, but now he finally warmed up. Chen Ming climbed onto the Kong, squatted at the head of the Kong, feeling the warmth, and began to feel sleepy. Seeing that his wife hadn't returned yet, he guessed she would sleep at his father-in-law's place. After all, the baby, just over 100 days old, was still waiting to be fed. It was troublesome to go back and forth, and besides, what was the use of coming back? If she couldn't eat enough, how could she have milk? Chen Ming squatted on the Kong, recalling the wrongdoings he had committed before. The more he thought, the more regretful and ashamed he felt, and tears couldn't help but flow from his eyes. He felt that the people he had let down the most in this life were his parents, his wife and children, and his father-in-law and mother-in-law. In his previous life, it was all because he was too cowardly, always overthinking and getting stuck in a rut. He had been stubborn all his life, lazy all his life, and had harmed too many people. By the time he woke up, it was too late. The people he wanted to make amends to were no longer in this world. Fortunately, heaven gave him a chance to be reborn, and everything was still in time. So no matter how much suffering he endured now, he had no complaints. Wasn't this a kind of redemption, a kind of comfort? At least it was a driving force urging him not to repeat the same mistakes. After a while, Chen Ming smelled a fragrant aroma. Hungry as he was, he quickly got off the Kong, went to the outer room, opened the pot lid, and took out a large bowl and a spoon. As the delicious fish soup wafted over, Chen Ming couldn't wait to scoop a bowl of soup. Ignoring the heat, he tremblingly brought the bowl to his lips. He was scalded at first, then blew on it and took small sips. A large piece of fish fell into his mouth, and he even wanted to swallow the bones. But he carefully pulled the fish bones out of his mouth, ate the fish meat, and even swallowed the cooked red chili peppers. Although it was spicy, his body warmed up. With a big pot of fish soup and several fish in his stomach, Chen Ming, who hadn't had a full meal in a long time, let out a long burp and a satisfied look appeared on his face. After eating his fill, he finally had some strength. Chen Ming came to the door, pushed it open, and saw that the lights at his father-in-law's house were still on, and he could hear bursts of laughter coming from inside. Chen Ming squatted at the door and watched quietly. Seeing how harmonious the atmosphere was in his father-in-law's family, he felt envious. After watching for a while, Chen Ming turned and went into the house, found a needle and thread, and sewed up the cotton jacket that had been torn while in the mountains. He planned to go into the mountains again tonight. If he hadn't been hungry and lacking strength, afraid of fainting in the mountains, he wouldn't have bothered to come back. Then he boiled another pot of hot water. He plucked the feathers from the pheasant, cut off 2 drumsticks and kept them, then cleaned the pheasant, chopped it up, and threw it into the pot to stir-fry directly, since there was no oil at home. He sprinkled some salt, threw the last 2 dried chili peppers into the pot, added water, and started stewing the chicken. Chen Ming planned to fill his stomach before going into the mountains, so he would have the strength to fight all night, hoping to have some gains when he returned tomorrow morning. At this moment, in the house of his father-in-law, Han Xiaomei sat at the head of the Kong, occasionally raising her head and looking out the window. When she saw the light in her own house was on, she breathed a sigh of relief. But she felt a bit uneasy. Her fourth sister's husband, Zhang Yuxiang, and her fourth sister, Han Xiujuan, were sitting on the Kong chatting and eating peanuts. The child had already fallen asleep. Her father, Han Jingui, was sitting nearby smoking a pipe, and her mother, Luo Haiying, was sitting on the edge of the Kong, husking corn into a winnowing basket. The room was also warm and cozy. Xiaomei, listen to your mother. Don't go back for the next couple of days. Look how skinny you've become, just skin and bones. This is no life for you. Before you brought that scourge into the house, when did you ever suffer like this? Now you can't even eat your fill. Why are you still with him? Luo Haiying said while husking corn. This daughter was flesh of her flesh, and seeing her live such a bitter life, how could she feel good? She felt heartbroken. Did he beat you again today? Han Jingui also raised his head and asked. Today his daughter had come back, and the relationship between father and daughter had finally eased. Usually, he wouldn't even speak to her when he saw her. Their relationship had long become strained. But after all, she was his daughter. Seeing her ruined like this, the father felt bad. Now that she was home, he just wanted to ask a couple of questions. No, he didn't hit me. Han Xiaomei shook her head. Bullshit. Look at your face. The handprint hasn't faded yet. Do you think I'm blind? Why did I, Han Jingui, have such a worthless daughter? Why are you so weak? Why must it be him? If you had listened to me back then and divorced him early, I could have found you another family. What are you afraid of? Can't you live without him? Han Jingui tapped his pipe against the edge of the Kong, sending sparks flying everywhere. The more he spoke, the angrier he became, his stomach full of pent-up anger. Fifth daughter, it's not that I want to criticize you, but look at what you've chosen. He has no ability, and he's lame. Apart from being somewhat handsome, what else is remarkable about him? You've got your parents worried sick every day. Isn't that upsetting? Han Xiujuan also shouted in a loud voice. What are you saying, fourth sister? Do you know how he became lame? If it weren't for him back then, I would have fallen into the ice hole and drowned. Can you all stop talking? Han Xiaomei suddenly raised her head, her eyes red, and said, was it grievance or anger? Chen Ming was her husband, and he was a bastard, tormenting her in various ways. How could Han Xiaomei not hate him? But still, she could criticize her own husband however she wanted, but others had no right to point fingers. Look, I only said a few words, and you're already defending him. I think you haven't been beaten enough. Fourth sister Han Xiujuan curled her lips and said, Fifth daughter, you are my daughter, born of me. You can't be weak. You can live a hard life. These days, no one has it easy, but you can't endure this. What kind of man stays at home all day and relies on his wife to borrow grain from her parents' house? I won't say anything about that. You chose your man, and you're willing to suffer and work hard. Look at the injury on your face and the injury on your hand from a while ago. He doesn't treat you like a person. At home, we treat you like a treasure, but that bastard treats you like grass. Han Jingui was so angry by this point that his face turned livid. He was disappointed that his daughter had turned out so useless. No matter how much he scolded or beat her, she wouldn't leave. What exactly was she after? Even if I really did divorce him, what would happen? The child would lose his father, and people would laugh at me for being divorced. Could I just stay at my parents' house forever and depend on you two to support me? Dad, Mom, I know he can't turn back, but I've accepted my fate for this life. Now I just want to raise the child to adulthood. As she said this, Han Xiaomei wiped away her tears, then slowly stood up, walked to the cradle, looked at the child lying under the quilt, and reached out to touch him. No matter how much suffering she endured, no matter what torment she bore, as long as Han Xiaomei saw her child, she could endure anything and bear any hardship. Seeing his daughter so unambitious, Han Jingui became even angrier. He slammed things around and grunted several times. You're just saying one thing, but meaning another. What's really on your mind? Don't think I don't know. You just can't leave that worthless man. Sooner or later, he'll ruin you, and then you'll regret it. When Han Jingui said this, he got out of bed, pushed open the door, and went outside to get some air. Otherwise, he would be angered to death by his daughter. Luo Haiying felt even more helpless. This girl is stubborn and simply won't listen. She's determined to go down a dead-end road. Watching her child jump into a fire pit and being powerless to stop it. How painful must it be for a mother's heart? Meanwhile, Chen Ming had already stewed the chicken. He took a few bites and found it a bit tough, But in these times, just having meat to eat was already a blessing. The meat in his mouth was very satisfying. It was much better than eating chaff and vegetables, and it gave him strength. He also threw the 2 drumsticks into the pot to stew. Since there were no ingredients, he could only sprinkle some salt for flavor, but it still gave off the aroma of meat. After the 2 drumsticks were cooked, Chen Ming ate them with gusto, burping repeatedly. He didn't know how long it had been since he'd eaten this much and been this full. He put the 2 drumsticks into a bowl and was about to head out to deliver them to his wife, when he saw the door of his father-in-law's house being pushed open, and Han Xiujuan and Zhang Yuxiang walked out. They saw Chen Ming standing at his doorstep, holding a bowl in his hand, and both curled their lips and sneered a few times. Shameless. A grown man, just like a beggar. As if everyone owes you something. Seeing the bowl in Chen Ming's hand, Han Xiujuan thought he couldn't bear the hunger and was going to borrow food from his father again. So she made a few sarcastic remarks. A man should have some self-respect. At least you're a man. Living like this, if I were his parents, I would have strangled him at birth. Better than letting him harm others. Zhang Yuxiang echoed a few words, then took his wife's arm, walked to the door, opened it, and went straight in. With a bang, the door slammed shut. Obviously, it was meant for Chen Ming to see. But Chen Ming ignored it and looked toward his father-in-law's house. The light that was still on suddenly went out, clearly indicating the family had gone to sleep. Chen Ming looked at the window and, before the light went out, vaguely saw his wife leaning against the window, looking toward his house. He sighed. He had originally planned to deliver the drumsticks and also see his daughter, since the child had just passed her 100-day mark and had been taken by his father-in-law. Almost a month had passed, and the father hadn't been able to see her even once. Before, he didn't have the heart, but now he had the heart, but no opportunity. He took a deep breath, turned around, and went into the house. Then he got under the covers, planning to sleep first so he could be alert in the middle of the night. He slept straight until around 2 in the morning. Chen Ming woke up. Since he had something on his mind, he woke up promptly at the right time. He fumbled around, put on the cotton jacket that was on the Kong, then put on the cotton pants, put on his hat and cotton mittens, and wrapped his wife's green scarf around his face. You know, in the old days in the Northeast, especially on such a cold day, at night without the sun, it was bitterly cold outside. It could be minus 35 or 36 degrees, enough to freeze a person to death. This was no joke. In the 1970s and 1980s, quite a few people froze to death in the Northeast. Some people, drunk, would plunge headfirst into a snowdrift, and as their body heat escaped, they felt warm all over. Touching the snow actually felt comfortable. But once they fell asleep, they never woke up again. When found, they were already frozen stiff. Even in the 1990s, there were drunkards who froze to death on the streets. After Chen Ming put on his clothes, wrapped up tightly, he slung the rusty single-barreled shotgun on his back, put the dog sled on, and threw all the pre-made snares and tools onto it. Then Chen Ming pushed open the door and walked out. A wave of cold air instantly swept over him, wiping away all the warmth from his body. On such a cold day, no one wanted to go out. Even the dogs outside were shivering from the cold. The less it snowed, the colder it got. Chen Ming's feet crunched in the snow as he stood in the yard and glanced at his father-in-law's house. He gritted his teeth and swore in his heart, "Wife, in my previous life, I let you down, making you suffer hardship and humiliation all your life. I will cure my leg myself. When I do, I'll give you a man who can support the family, who knows how to cherish his wife, a real man of the Northeast." With that thought, Chen Ming lifted his leg, silently made up his mind, and then walked out. On this cold winter night, the moon hung in the sky. With no clouds, the weather was still clear. The moonlight shone on the snow, casting a white glow and illuminating the surroundings. Chen Ming also carried a flashlight. The batteries were almost dead, and since he couldn't afford new ones, he could only warm them on the Kong to get a few more uses out of them. He also knew that going into the mountains at night was very dangerous, and many animals were inactive and didn't come out at night. But precisely at night, if he could find these prey, the success rate of capturing and killing them would greatly increase. After a while, he walked out of the village and headed straight for Chonglin Mountain. After about 40 minutes, Chen Ming finally arrived at the foot of the mountain. Before he even went up the mountain, as soon as he put down the dog sled, he suddenly saw a dark shadow darting in the snow ahead. He quickly raised his shotgun, turned on the flashlight with the other hand, and shone it along the barrel. With just one shine, he saw the dark shadow. Confirming it was a mountain hare, that is, a wild rabbit, he quickly turned off the flashlight to save battery. The moment he turned off the flashlight, he rushed out with the shotgun in his arms. The mountain hare also sensed someone chasing behind, especially the crunching sound of footsteps in the snow, which completely frightened the hare. It darted out a few times, floundering in the snow, kicking up a spray of white snow. Chen Ming's gun had already been loaded with gunpowder and steel pellets, but after firing one shot, he would have to reload, which was very troublesome. So without sufficient certainty, he couldn't easily fire the first shot. He chased while looking for an opportunity. In this part of the Northeast, at night, the dangers in the mountains seep into your heart like a buried snow crust. Chen Ming knew very well that going into the mountains at night was like putting your head on the line. If you weren't careful, you might not come back. Moreover, many animals, like hibernating, didn't move much at night and didn't come out to roam. But then again, if you can spot prey at night, your chances of catching it are much higher. After a while, Chen Ming left the village, stepping on the snow that creaked under his feet, heading straight for Changlin Mountain. About 40 minutes later, he finally reached the foot of the mountain. Before he even started up the mountain, as soon as he put down the dog sled, he spotted a dark shadow in the snow ahead, darting around like a whirlwind. He quickly raised his shotgun, and with the other hand turned on the flashlight, shining it forward along the barrel. With that light, he could see the shadow clearly. It turned out to be a mountain jumper, a wild rabbit. He quickly turned off the flashlight, thinking that batteries were expensive, so he should save them whenever possible. The moment he turned off the flashlight, he took off running with his shotgun in his arms. That mountain jumper was also alert, with someone chasing behind. Especially the crunching sound of Chen Ming's steps in the snow. It was scared out of its wits, darting around like a headless fly, leaping far away in a few bounds, kicking up snowflakes in the snow dust. Chen Ming's gun had been loaded with gunpowder and steel pellets long ago, but after firing one shot, it had to be reloaded, which was a hassle. So without full confidence, he couldn't just fire the first shot recklessly. He chased while slyly looking for an opportunity, his eyes like searchlights, fixed on the mountain jumper. He chased for a long time without finding a chance to shoot. The man and the rabbit were locked in a contest on the snow at the foot of the mountain, seeing that the mountain jumper was about to dash into the forest. Once it got in, surrounded by dense vegetation and snow pits one after another, finding it again would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Besides, Chen Ming's legs had always had a bit of a problem. Though not completely lame, his legs often felt numb, like an electric current passing through. So he couldn't run as fast as a normal person, let alone a wild rabbit. And with his legs not being agile, if he fell into a snow pit, it would be terrible. On a night like this, if he couldn't climb out, he would definitely freeze to death. He frowned, his heart anxious like an ant on a hot pan, seeing that mountain jumper leap onto a raised hillock in the forest. His view was suddenly blocked, and he couldn't see what was ahead. If it was a snow pit, the rabbit jumping down would mean no more chasing. It would definitely disappear. So at this moment, he had to shoot. By now, the distance between him and the mountain jumper had closed to about 10 meters, just within shooting range. It all depended on whether the shot would hit. His heart pounded, and his nerves instantly tensed up. If he hit, there would be a reward. If he missed, it would all be in vain, and he'd be drenched in sweat. Chen Ming gritted his teeth and stopped in his tracks. The mountain jumper was hopping on the hillock, moving its short legs back and forth, as if looking for an escape route. Just as it jumped up, Chen Ming pulled the trigger with a click. A flash of fire streaked across the dark night like a brilliant firework. Chen Ming fired this shot purely on instinct, not knowing if he hit. When the muzzle flash dissipated with a puff, he quickly turned on the flashlight and shone it, thinking to himself that something was wrong. The wild rabbit on the hillside was gone. Instead, there was a patch of snow pierced by steel pellets. His heart skipped a beat, thinking, wasn't all this effort wasted? But he didn't lose heart and moved step by step toward the hillside. After struggling to climb up, he looked down and saw there was indeed a concave hollow ahead. Fortunately, the hollow wasn't too deep. He swept his flashlight down and saw the mountain jumper lying at the bottom, the snow stained red, clearly knocked down by that shot. Chen Ming grinned, his face beaming with joy like it was New Year. He slid down the slope, swooshing to the bottom. Then he grabbed the dead rabbit in one hand. He hadn't even entered the mountain yet, and already had a catch. This was a great start. He thought to himself that tonight he should work hard. If he could catch some rare game, like roe deer or foxes, he could take them to the city and exchange them for a lot of grain. So he wouldn't have to worry about food and drink for the next while. After carrying the rabbit and struggling to climb back up the slope, Chen Ming sat in the snow, panting heavily. After resting for a while and finally catching his breath, Chen Ming slowly got up and put the caught wild rabbit into a prepared basket. Then covered it with the lid, reached out his frozen red hands, and tied the rope, finally feeling at ease. Chen Ming rubbed his hands together and blew warm breath into them, which brought some relief to his frozen hands. At that moment, the gun barrel was covered with frost, which was enough to show how cold it was at night. He didn't stay in the same place any longer. The longer he stayed, the colder it got, so he had to keep moving. Then he plunged back into the hollow and started searching around, carrying various tools on his back, including a prepared hook used specifically for digging out badgers. If he encountered such a creature, he needed a handy tool. After entering the forest, he wandered around again, and soon Chen Ming made a new discovery. He saw several earth holes covered with snow in the crevice of a hillock, and the snow at the entrances had been blown away. Judging by the size of the holes, there should be hog badgers inside. Of course, this was just Chen Ming's guess. He shivered as he took out matches from his bosom, then found some weeds nearby. Turning his back to the wind, he opened his cotton coat and lit the pine torch against his chest. After lighting it, he cupped the fire with both hands, brought it to the entrance of the earth hole, and set the weeds on fire. He also warmed his hands by the fire, feeling cozy and comfortable. But he wasn't just enjoying the comfort. The reason he lit the fire wasn't to warm himself, but to smoke the hog badgers out. He pushed the grass in, and the fire grew stronger. He added some dry branches, and when the fire was about right, he put out part of it, letting the thick smoke pour into the hole. Then Chen Ming went to another entrance, holding a rope with both hands, waiting for the hog badger to crawl out. He had already bent down, putting his ear close to the entrance, listening for any sound inside. The thick smoke had already come out of the other entrance, and only then did Chen Ming raise his head. He had heard movement inside, and his heart filled with surprise. That meant it wasn't in vain. There was definitely something in there. Soon, a dark shadow approached the entrance, its eyes reflecting in the moonlight, showing a hint of cunning. As soon as it poked its head out, Chen Ming's big hands pressed down into the hole. But the little creature inside was still agile and quickly retreated. Chen Ming wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he grinned, a stiff smile on his face. His face was already red from the cold, even numb and without feeling. But at that moment, he didn't care about that. He was full of excitement. Once he caught the little creature inside, tonight's work would be done. Catching a wild rabbit and a hog badger would be enough to eat for 2 days. Especially the hog badger's fat, which was not only edible, but also effective when applied to burn wounds. I don't believe you won't come out. Let's see how long you can hold out. Chen Ming crouched in front of the hole, his knees pressing into the snow, his hands tightly gripping a rope at the entrance, so that as soon as there was any movement and it poked its head out, he could strangle it. And sure enough, the little creature inside was indeed bothered by the smoke and poked its head out again. This time Chen Ming was quick of eye and deft of hand. He slipped the rope directly over it and instantly looped it around the little creature's neck. Then he quickly wound the rope all around it. And with a pull of his hand, he dragged the little thing out from inside. It was not small either, at least 60 to 70 centimeters long, covered all over with fine fur. After being hoisted up by the rope, it struggled wildly, letting out a series of cries. On closer look, it was indeed a hog badger, and it looked quite plump, clearly having stored up plenty of fat since autumn. Having caught the hog badger, Chen Ming secured it with a few more loops of rope and then hung it on a tree. The rope was very sturdy. Even a wild boar couldn't break free from it for a while. Chen Ming glanced at the hog badger swinging left and right on the branch, a joyful smile spreading across his face. He was just about to extinguish the fire at the other entrance. After all, it was late at night, and deep in the mountains in winter, everything was dry. The trees and weeds would catch fire at the slightest spark. Chen Ming didn't want to start a mountain fire. That would be too wicked. He had just put out the fire on this side when he saw another shadow poke its head out of the entrance and then retreat back inside. Chen Ming's eyes widened, and his face lit up with surprise. He hadn't expected that there would be 2 hog badgers in this one burrow. Tonight he had hit the jackpot. His luck was really good. At the thought, Chen Ming took out the hook and reached it into the burrow, probing deeper and deeper. When he felt it hit something soft and squishy, he braced the other end of the hook against the edge of the entrance and pulled back. Immediately, a cry came from inside, and Chen Ming even saw the entrance tremble slightly, shaking snow off the top. You think you can get away? Come out. Feeling that he had hooked it firmly, Chen Ming gave a sudden, forceful tug outward. With his hands in his cotton mittens, he saw the shadow emerge and press down directly. The shadow turned its head and bit down on his cotton mitten, causing some pain. But Chen Ming couldn't care about that. He hurriedly pulled off his belt from his waist, and then tied up the shadow. When he lifted it up and took a look, Chen Ming's face showed confusion. He examined it carefully for a long time before his eyes suddenly widened and his mouth fell open. Damn, isn't this a raccoon dog? Looking at the little creature before him, Chen Ming's confusion turned to delight. He never would have imagined that this one burrow housed a hog badger, and also a wild raccoon dog. As for the raccoon dog, the most valuable part was definitely its fur. The meat was edible, though not particularly tasty, but the fur was something special. The best fur was called 6-star white needle and was the highest quality, fetching a high price anywhere. The raccoon dog before him was light golden in color, with a short, stout body, a round head, and a pair of small, alert ears standing upright, twitching from time to time. Its two black bean-like eyes were lively and cunning, exuding a clever air, but it had still fallen into the hands of Chen Ming the hunter. Its nose was small and moist, standing out strikingly against its golden-brown fur. Its limbs were short and sturdy, firmly supporting its round body, and its fluffy tail behind it was also puffed up and raised. Based on the texture of the golden-brown fur, he could tell that although it didn't reach the quality of 6-star white needle, it was still second only to the top grade, the second best quality. If he sold this thing on the black market, by Chen Ming's estimate, it would fetch at least 50 or 60 yuan, and that was just his guess. You see, 50 or 60 yuan in the 1980s, even for salaried families, was more than a month's basic wage for one person. In rural areas, that was 3 to 4 months' living expenses. At least for those 3 or 4 months, even if you did nothing, you could live quite comfortably and even enjoy pork a couple of times every now and then. In one night, he had caught a mountain hare, a hog badger, and this raccoon dog. Chen Ming had made a great haul. It seemed that Changlin Mountain was indeed rich in resources. How had he missed out on this in his previous life? Fortunately, he had been given the chance to be reborn and live again. Deep in his heart, a fiery hope burned. This mountain before him would become the foundation of his wealth in this new life and his personal hunting ground. All the resources of the entire mountain belonged to him. As for other hunters, it didn't matter, as long as he had his own gains. He picked up the raccoon dog and the hog badger and walked contentedly toward the sled. When he got there, he opened the burlap sack and tossed both little creatures in. Then he tightly tied the mouth of the sack with a rope and threw it onto the sled. With the sled rope over his shoulder, Chen Ming headed down the mountain. When he reached the foot of the mountain, there was still some distance to go, but Chen Ming didn't feel tired. He hummed a tune all the way, under the moonlight, braving the cold wind. By the time he reached home, the sky was already showing the pale light of dawn, not yet fully bright, but the sky had turned a clear blue. Chen Ming saw that the gate was locked. Helpless, he could only toss all the spoils from the sled into the yard, and then, not wanting to disturb his in-laws' rest, he propped the sled upright by the door and then climbed over the wall into the yard. Because one of his feet was numb, he didn't land steadily and fell flat on his butt. Chen Ming let out a deep sigh. It seemed he needed to treat his leg sooner. But since he hadn't caught a deer yet and had no deer blood, he would have to sell some things first, then buy some medicinal herbs to start treating his leg early. The sooner it was healed, the more strength and agility he would have on the mountain. Otherwise, chasing that mountain hare today wouldn't have been so exhausting. He carried all the night's spoils into the house, closed the door, and lit the stove again to heat the kong. By the time the kong was warm, Chen Ming was already so sleepy that he was yawning non-stop and his eyelids were drooping. He took off all his clothes and pants, and the bedding on the kong had already been warmed. He crawled in, lay down, and fell asleep instantly. He was just too tired and exhausted. Having wandered around the mountains several times in the middle of the night, chasing hares, digging out hog badgers, and catching a raccoon dog, the little food he had eaten in the afternoon was almost completely digested. Chen Ming slept until broad daylight and was woken by hunger. He quickly got up, and while his in-laws were still asleep, he pushed open the door and ran out, went to the toilet, and then hurried back into the house. Then he lit the fire, boiled some water in the pot, filled a thermos, and started cooking. There was no rice or grain in the house, so all he could cook was the game he had caught. The fish he had caught last night hadn't been finished, so this morning he planned to make some fish soup. There were also 2 pheasant legs placed by the stove, already cold. Chen Ming thought for a moment, then picked them up and, while his in-laws were still asleep, put them on the windowsill by the window. Then he turned and went back inside to start making the fish soup. The only remaining dried chili was also roasted by Chen Ming in the stove. Once it was charred, he took out a large bowl, ladled a bowl of fish soup, and then crushed the charred chili and sprinkled it in. Immediately, the aroma burst forth, and Chen Ming couldn't help but swallow. He brought the bowl to his nose and sniffed the fragrance. It was very delicious. Then he happily carried the fish soup into the house, sipping the soup and eating the meat, spitting the fish bones onto the table. After downing 3 bowls of soup and eating 2 fish, Chen Ming wiped his mouth, a look of satisfaction on his face. When a person is full, they start to have wild thoughts. Before being full, there is only one thing, and that is to fill their stomach. Once full, countless things await. After cleaning up the table, Chen Ming lay by the window looking towards his father-in-law's house. Soon he saw the door pushed open and Han Xiumei walk out. After going out, Han Xiumei glanced towards home, sighed, then turned and walked towards the back, seemingly going to the toilet. In the rural northeast, toilets are outdoor pit latrines. In winter, you only move your butt. At night, the hardest thing is getting up to go. As soon as Chen Ming saw his wife come out, he hurriedly put on shoes, scrambled out, and ran to the backyard, standing not far away, staring at the toilet. Soon, Han Xiumei lifted the burlap curtain of the pit latrine, and while tying her pants, walked out. When she looked up and saw Chen Ming, she was startled. Han Xiumei screamed in fright, covered her mouth, and stepped back 2 steps. After looking carefully, she patted her heaving chest and took a few deep breaths. Chen Ming slowly walked over, scaring Han Xiumei into stepping back again. You, what do you want? Han Xiumei's voice trembled and shook, not from cold, but from fear. She was afraid Chen Ming would touch her again and torment her with that perverted marital lifestyle. She had truly had enough. It seemed every time she ran to her parents' home, after returning, Chen Ming would act like a pervert, tossing and turning all night. He had worn away the last bit of goodwill Han Xiumei had for him. Wife, don't be afraid. I know I wasn't a good person before and did many beastly things. But rest assured, I will never hit you again. I know. Whatever I say now, you won't believe. In your heart, you must hate me to death. I went up the mountain yesterday, got lucky, and caught a wild chicken. I put the chicken legs by the window. Take them and steam them to eat. Chen Ming turned and pointed to the house, looking a bit embarrassed. His tone became flustered. Han Xiumei heard it, but didn't care about the so-called chicken legs. As long as Chen Ming didn't hit her, and she could avoid this disaster, that was enough. I know. She replied flatly, then lowered her head and carefully walked past Chen Ming. Chen Ming didn't pester, afraid of scaring Han Xiumei. He had done wrong for a long time and had already left a shadow in her heart. Maisie, Chen Ming, with his back to Han Xiumei, suddenly shouted. Han Xiumei stopped abruptly. What? She asked lightly. How about we get a divorce? I will still treat you well, wholeheartedly, just don't want to delay you anymore. As Chen Ming said this, the cold air rushed into his mouth, making his lungs ache. But his heart ached even more, as if suffocating. These words were like a knife, scraped out of his mouth. He had long known that his father-in-law, because his daughter wouldn't divorce him, no longer recognized her as his daughter. Even if she followed him eating chaff and vegetables, being tormented and beaten daily, the father-in-law Han Jingwei was disappointed in her. So Chen Ming thought, in this life, being reborn was a chance given by heaven to make up for family and loved ones. So as long as Han Xiumei was happy and could be happy, he would do anything. At that moment, Han Xiumei heard these words, and for some reason, her nose turned sour. So much grievance couldn't be spoken, so it flowed from her eyes. Wiping her tears, Han Xiumei exhaled a puff of white breath, then said, Wait until the child is older. Then she turned and walked towards the front yard, leaving Chen Ming squatting on the ground, painfully pulling his hair. Han Xiumei reached the door, her eyes red, and wiped her tears so her parents wouldn't notice. While wiping tears, she saw 2 frozen chicken legs in a bowl by the window. After a moment's thought, she picked them up and went inside. Soon, Chen Ming was also freezing, so he turned and went home, got under the covers, and slept until noon. When he woke up, he started getting dressed, heated the calm, then loaded all the prey from yesterday onto the sled. He pulled it and went out. Just as he reached the gate, he saw Zhang Yuxiang with his hands in his sleeves, shrinking his neck and coming in from outside. In a blink, he saw Chen Ming pulling a sled with 2 bulging burlap sacks that were moving. They must be alive. Zhang Yuxiang immediately felt curious, stood in front of Chen Ming, smiled, and pointed at the 2 sacks. Little cripple. Ah, Chen Ming, what's in your sacks, jumping around? What are you up to? Zhang Yuxiang was nosy and loved gossip. No different from the village women, loving to chatter. If something happened, he'd rush forward. If nothing, he'd hang around the women's circles chatting. Nothing big or small in the village escaped him. If something happened, his loose mouth would spill it all. What's it to you? Move aside. Chen Ming pushed him away and pulled the sled out. He planned to go to town to exchange the prey for some money, so he could buy some rice. Oh my, this little cripple has quite a temper. A bully at home, no ambition except nagging your wife. Zhang Yuxiang curled his lips with a mocking smile, turned, and entered the yard. Chen Ming pulled the dog sled step by step into the biting wind. He shrank his neck. His face was already frozen red. His ears felt like they were burning, numb from the cold. The old Northeast could freeze a person to death. In winter, it was miserable, especially with scarce supplies. Heating was manageable. Relying on the mountains, villagers would go up to gather firewood. But food was hard to come by, especially since they hadn't yet left the production team's work point system. Families with strong laborers could eat their fill, exchanging work points at year's end for grain or money. But most families could only barely get by, making coarse cornmeal buns, pasting corn cakes, and making sauerkraut soup, eating that all winter. Their mouths were already tasteless. Eating meat was a luxury. Even Han Jingui, as village head, eating meat once a month at home was already good, let alone ordinary families. Only a few hunters, when they had nothing to do, would go up the mountain to try their luck. If they caught something, they could have some meat for a while. In this era, some women, to eat well, would sleep with other men. If caught, they were labeled adulteresses, a lifestyle problem. Although not as severe as before when they might be shot, they would still have shoes hung around their necks and be beaten by their husbands. They would never hold their heads up again. Those caught were few, those not caught were many. Isn't there a saying in the Northeast? Every household has liquor. If you don't leak, you're a good hand. And Chen Ming, pulling the sled, had already left the village. The wind was getting stronger, but his pace never stopped. Instead, it became more and more determined. Even though one leg was always numb, his heart was growing hotter. He walked the 7-li road for over 40 minutes. Finally, he arrived at the small town. After entering the town, the wind around him decreased a lot. After all, the houses in the town were quite dense, and there were many people coming and going. Chen Ming quickly arrived at the market, only to find it had already dispersed. Then he saw an old man popping popcorn and walked over. Suddenly, with a bang, white smoke rose into the air. A group of children gathered around. Then the old man took an iron basin, collected the shelled sticky corn into his bag, and then filled an iron basin with the popped popcorn and gave it to the child. This was the old way of bartering. To get popcorn, you exchanged corn or bought it with money. Chen Ming approached and asked with a smile, "Old man, let me ask you something. Is there any black market nearby?" The old man looked Chen Ming up and down a few times, then asked, "What do you want to sell, young man? Don't think the crackdown on speculation and profiteering is not so strict now, but if you sell any contraband, you'll definitely be thrown in." Chen Ming grinned and said, "What are you thinking, old man? How bold do you think I am? I'm asking you openly. I just have some wild game to sell, and the market has already dispersed." Hearing this, the old man glanced at the sled at Chen Ming's feet and then came closer. As Chen Ming opened the sack, the old man peeked inside and then smiled. "You're quite something, kid. You managed to get a badger in this cold winter. Impressive. You don't need to sell this at the black market. Go to those private restaurants that specialize in wild game. Take it there. Many southern bosses specifically buy this stuff." The old man pointed to the street across the way. Chen Ming looked over and saw 2 private restaurants with signs for wild game at the entrance. He hadn't noticed them when he arrived. Hearing this, Chen Ming's heart stirred. "Thanks, old man. I'll go ask." With that, Chen Ming pulled the sled and headed across the street. He arrived at the entrance of a restaurant called Songjiang Restaurant and glanced inside. Sure enough, despite the freezing weather, the room was full of guests, and it was steaming hot inside. The diners had taken off their cotton-padded jackets, looking extremely comfortable. Some men sat together drinking and chatting, eating with great enthusiasm. Some families of 3 or 4 gathered together eating hot pot, the atmosphere warm and cozy. In the past, doors were covered with curtains, and the inner door was wooden, with a piece of glass in the middle. After lifting the curtain, Chen Ming pressed his face against the door and looked in. Soon, a middle-aged man wearing a round felt hat and dressed in shiny clothes came to the door, blocking Chen Ming's view. Then the middle-aged man pulled the door open. "What are you looking at? If you want to eat, come in quickly." The middle-aged man asked in a rough voice, "Are you the boss here? Do you buy wild game?" It was too cold, and Chen Ming just wanted to sell the game quickly and go home. So he asked directly. The middle-aged man looked at Chen Ming and asked, "Which village are you from? I haven't seen you before. Just tell me if you buy or not. Why all the useless talk?" Chen Ming had lost patience and turned to leave, planning to ask elsewhere. "Wait a moment. Why are you in such a hurry? I'll go call the boss for you. Our boss is from the south, and I can't make this decision. Come inside and warm up." The middle-aged man waved and called out. Chen Ming stopped, placed the sled at the door, and carried 2 bags into the house. The aroma of various dishes filled the entire room. Smelling it, Chen Ming felt his stomach growl. He stood near the door, watching the guests sitting at tables eating and drinking, some having instant boiled mutton, others having pork stew with sauerkraut, the plump blood sausages, and the slices of streaky pork boiling in the copper pot with sauerkraut made his stomach rumble just by looking, let alone eating. Chen Ming swallowed his saliva and averted his gaze. Soon, he heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and then a man wearing glasses, looking refined and not tall, but dressed appropriately. He wore a neat gray Zhongshan suit and shiny leather shoes, clearly someone of wealth and status. After coming downstairs, guided by the middle-aged man, he reached the door and saw Chen Ming. "Ah, hello. I heard you're from the countryside selling wild game. Can I take a look?" The refined man's speech wasn't pure northeastern dialect, but it had a hint of it. "It's all here. Take a look yourself," Chen Ming said, throwing the 2 bags in front of him. The refined man smiled, pushed up his glasses, and the middle-aged man beside him began to untie the sack. "I'm the boss here. My name is Lu Wenbin, from Jiangsu. Nice to meet you. As long as it's hunted from the mountains, my shop basically buys it." Lu Wenbin introduced himself politely. "My name is Chen Ming, a hunter of sorts. If you can give a fair price, I'll bring all my future catches here," Chen Ming said with a faint smile. At that moment, the middle-aged man looked up and waved at Lu Wenbin. "Boss, it's good stuff. Come take a look." At the middle-aged man's call, Lu Wenbin walked over, bent down, and when he saw what was in the sack, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He even looked surprised. Not bad. This is your northeastern badger, right? Good stuff. What's in that other bag?" Lu Wenbin opened the other bag with his hand, and when he looked inside, his eyes widened. His face gradually showed ecstasy, and his glasses almost fell into the sack, but he caught them just in time. Then the middle-aged man retied both bags. Lu Wenbin came to Chen Ming and made a gesture of invitation. "Brother, let's sit over there and talk. Chow Guobang, go get some dishes. I'll talk with this brother and heat up some wine to warm him up." Lu Wenbin instructed the middle-aged man, then led Chen Ming to the only empty table and sat down.